Greetings, Crafted Calling. Jeremiah Fife here, and I am joined by Tony Webster. He's a partner in the gospel here at CrossPointe Coast, the church where I am a pastor, and I'm excited to have Tony with us because he is not only a partner in the gospel, he is also an elder candidate here at CrossPointe Coast. And this past Sunday was Tony's first time ever preaching. And I thought, what a perfect person and what a perfect moment to have a conversation together with pastors and ministry leaders. Really have spent the last 2 months or so walking in preparation toward this last Sunday. Now, I've told you that Tony is a partner in the gospel here at CrossPointe Coast, that he's an elder candidate, but he's also a husband to Dawn Webster, and he is also the chief people officer at Christian Care Ministries. So I really appreciate your taking some time to spend with me here. And I'll tell you why I thought that Tony would be perfect for this podcast. We are a part of the Crafted Calling community because we are seeking to sharpen the tools of our ministry craft. And we're looking to do that together by sharpening one another, sharpening ourselves in coaching. And during these last 2 months, a lot of that time has been coaching toward preaching. Crafted Calling has 3 modules that we have in coaching: a module for preaching, for pastoring, and for leading. And so really some of the tools that I would seek to sharpen and that Crafted Calling would be a whetstone for in preaching, we've been able to develop together over the last few months. So, but before we start talking about that whole process, Tony, I thought, why don't we go to the scripture that you preached on? And you were in Jeremiah 17. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So Jeremiah 17, why don't you tell us just a little bit of a summary of what's going on in this passage, Jeremiah 17, 1 through 10, right?
Uh-huh. Yes. Yeah. This passage was one that I have known for some time, mm-hmm. and it meant a lot to me during a period of my life, probably about 20 years ago, mm-hmm. and where I was learning about really, do I really trust God when the pressure's on, mm-hmm. or is it just something that I say I do and then I kind of do my own thing? Yeah. And the Lord was teaching me about that. This passage, when I first thought about needing a topic, mm-hmm. this was one of those 3 or 4 that I thought of, and just because of the focus on trusting the Lord mm-hmm. and keeping our eyes on Him, that just struck me as a message that I probably could convey pretty well.
Yeah.
It does have some history attached to it, and I'm kind of a history context person.
Yeah. And you did a tremendous job. I look forward to talking about that in a bit, but you could tell that you enjoyed learning what the scriptures had to tell us about what was going on in this passage in sort of a historical context.
Yeah. Yes, and I had to, and I think it was, I had to watch myself a little bit, and you cautioned me on this because the history part comes very easy to me, uh-huh. and I could probably have talked the whole time about the history of Israel and the kings that led up to what Jeremiah was dealing with. Yeah. But I did condense it a bit.
Yeah. Yeah. And I could have listened to you the whole time on that. I was having a blast. And I thought that, and we'll make sure we link the message in the show notes. But I thought that the way that you were clearly enjoying what you'd mm-hmm. learned and clearly enjoying being able to share it with us, and yet you kept it to what we needed to know in order to understand God's word in this passage, not to all become history buffs in the room.
Yes. Yeah. And I think that was in one of our meetings, mm-hmm. you advised me about that. And I kept that in the back of my mind, just, okay, that's a portion of it, but that cannot be the major message. So anyway, it was a passage that has meant a lot to me. I'm not an expert in Jeremiah the prophet, mm-hmm. but that whole era of Israel's history before the captivity is so interesting to me, of what the Lord was telling His people through His prophets. Yeah.
Yeah, I think really a big center in the passage was that verse 7, really where I think you got the title from, the blessed is the man who trusts in the Lord. And then it goes on to say, whose trust is the Lord.
Yes.
Yeah. So he's like the object.
He is. And that's at first it appears sort of redundant. Why would he say it? But then when you look at the words, no, it's a different purpose. There's trust in, but then trust is.
Yes. Yeah. He is the trust. Yeah. That's really powerful. There were a couple of things that really struck me as I was hearing you preach. These aren't like the main idea, but they move forward this passage that really involves God's judgment on Judah, why he's judging them, what it's going to look like to dwell in that judgment, what it looks like to remain planted in God, perhaps even in the middle of judgment. And you mentioned Daniel as someone who went like right through the judgment. And yet he doesn't look like the shrub of verses 5-6. He looks like the tree of verses 7-8. It's powerful. Yeah. And then, but one of the things that you mentioned is, it's the beginning. It's talking about them building these high places in the mountains in the open country. The wealth of their treasures he's going to give to spoil. God gave them all of this wealth, and now he's going to give it over to their enemies. And what struck me is you said, this isn't a direct quote, but it was in there, the best places in the land, the lush hilltops which God had given them, they gave over to idols. That just was particularly powerful to me, Tony. I really appreciate that. And it just makes me think like that's what we do, right? What we have is from the Lord. It's a gift from him for the purpose of worship. And then we take those things and we hand them over to that which they don't belong to idols.
Yes.
Or to self. We try and consume it.
Yes. A lot of that consumer idea of it's all about me and what I need. And I don't have a lot of ideas about what ceremonies were done there, but just the fact that the best of what God gave them, he saw that they took that and gave it over to that which was exactly opposite of what he wanted them to do. Yeah.
And you pointed out that their children saw them doing this, the way he says it, while their children remembered their altars and their Asherim beside every green tree and the high hills. And their children saw them doing this. And the children themselves are a gift from God. For what purpose? That they would grow in his, in wisdom according to the Lord and worship him. And
And what struck me in that with the children, because it's a very small reference in there, but that they were bringing their children up to do just the evil that they were doing. And just this training of generations of not only directly failing to follow God and sinning against him, they were bringing up the next generation and the generation after that to continue this sin and no end in sight.
Yeah. You mentioned near the beginning of the message that there was a grading scale for the kings. I thought it was funny because I'm like waiting for was it a 5-star rating system or something like that? And you said,
it was a 2-point scale.
It's a 2-point scale. I mean, right?
Yeah. It's either and I had read through 1st and 2nd Kings and Chronicles some time ago, but did some in prep for this.
Yeah.
But it just struck me that every king pretty much that's listed in there had a rating.
Yes.
And the kings that got the good rating did what was right in the sight of the Lord.
Yeah.
Or some phrase like that. And the bad kings did what was evil in the sight of the Lord.
And that's it.
That's it.
Yeah. And it's interesting. I went straight out of college. I taught a junior and senior high in a Christian junior and senior high school, and I taught a Bible course, and we walked through 1st, 2nd Samuel, 1st, 2nd Kings, and all of the northern kings were rated as bad.
Yes.
And there's only a couple in the south that were rated as good.
Yes.
And one of the things that happens over and over again is it says that the kings walked in the way of their father, in the wicked ways of their father, and they often are referencing back to like Ahab, right? And here, their children are watching them. They don't even have to be like training them; they're just watching what their parents are doing.
Yes, and that's how children learn most of what they do.
Yeah. So I could tell you enjoy this passage. I could tell when you first mentioned it. We don't normally just do one-off passages at CrossPointe Coast, but I thought, we've just started back into Romans. We're in Romans chapter 4, and I thought maybe not Romans chapter 4 for your first sermon ever. Certainly great content.
I really did appreciate that.
Yeah.
I mean, I was willing to go with what you assigned me, but when you said I could sort of be a free agent on this and pick one that you would want to do, that was a little bit freeing.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. And I know the congregation appreciated it, Tony. So what I want to do is I want to spend the remainder of our time talking about your experience in this process of leading up to your first sermon. Most sermons that are preached have roughly a 5 to 6 day incubation period, right? That's just kind of the 7-day cycle that we're in, right? But you got to sort of walk through an incubation period of about 2 months or so, as well as just the incubation period of that was going on in your heart over the course of, you said, like 10 years of this passage working in you. But maybe an initial question for Crafted Calling would be, what was your thought when you first heard that that preaching would be a part of the elder candidacy?
I was candidly a little, maybe a little intimidated by it. I'd been a member of the elder committee or group at two other churches, and one had no preaching requirements. It was almost more like just your administrative support. The second one, a smaller church, more like CrossPointe Coast, had a lot of focus on elders being able to teach. But the teaching could take various forms. Whether it's a small group Bible study, whether it would be if you had a Sunday school or youth program teaching there, or you could preach a sermon. It was an option if you so wanted to do it. And some of my colleagues did want to do that. I tended to more be with the larger group Bible studies and things, which I found I was more of a facilitator. So it was optional, and at that church I declined the option to do it. But then here, when you had told me that this was a requirement, it's like, okay, this is the way this church does it, and I think I understood more through some of the readings you gave us and that we have as part of the elder candidate program, seeing that is the main distinction in the Bible. What Paul distinguishes elders from deacons mainly because of this able to teach. And at this church, able to teach means that you will do it from the pulpit in a larger forum. Not that that's the only one, but that's an expectation of showing the church community on a full scale that this person is able to teach. And so, I thought, I guess so. I remember my wife would probably say that I had doubts about, do I really want to pursue this if this is a requirement?
That's great.
And, in hindsight, I probably made a bigger deal out of it than it needed to be, but it was something I really wanted to think about. But I came to the point of understanding, no, this is a good requirement.
I think that I appreciate what you're saying about that is a major distinction. An elder is able to teach. And that is one of the things that we want to do is the job of the congregation is to watch your life, watch your ministry. And one of the ways that they can watch you is they can watch you teach. Well, not everybody. Tony leads a community group here at CrossPointe Coast, and along with another household, and certainly that's a place where there's a facilitation and a teaching and a care for the people that God has put into our midst. But not everybody's in your community group, and so not everybody can watch you teach there. And now the church has watched you teach. I think fundamental to what the congregation saw, they didn't just see you teach Jeremiah 17. They saw you hold up Christ and his gospel. Good. And that's invaluable for a congregation to see of their elders. Whether now this is real simple. You did a wonderful job.
Well, thank you.
You really did, and I'm so thankful for that. But whether it was exciting or dry, it was true. It was good. And I think that one of the questions I would have for you is, when I say it was good, I don't mean that, and my preaching or Tony's or anyone listening that our preaching, could stand in for any great speech giver in history, right? What I mean by it being good is we took joy in the truth of God, and I think that was the best. One of the best goods that a preacher can do is enjoy God while speaking the truth. What was that like for you? Like, thinking about, like you said, you could take joy in history because you do. What was it like the interaction between taking joy in learning and in studying history and actually enjoying the truth of God and His gospel?
I think it kind of worked gradually in the process, and I wanted to enjoy the process.
Yeah.
And I asked the Lord to help me enjoy the process, even though I knew I was going to have those times when sometimes the words don't come quickly or it's just not there.
Yeah.
But I think that in my talking with the Lord about it, I was like, I want to honor Him in this, whether it's good or comes across well, whatever. I would like to be able to do that. Yeah. But if it doesn't, well, then just equip me to share the message you want me to share and in the way that you want me to do it, so that your people are somehow helped and that you, Lord, are glorified in this. Yeah. So it kind of goes back to the end of Psalm 19. Let the words of my mouth and the meditations of my heart be acceptable in your sight, O Lord, my rock and my redeemer. My dad was a pastor, and he often would close his messages with that.
Yeah.
And so those passages just would resonate, and really wanting to do a good job technically and not say anything stupid or in error.
Yeah, and not lose your place.
That's right.
Wind up saying something in error, not do your research. Yeah.
Yeah. And I asked the Lord for help with that. But then it was one of the things you mentioned to me about, and I think it was the idea of exaltation.
Yeah, expository exaltation. And I that stuck with me. And the idea of exaltation of the Lord in this is not me doing much other than being a messenger of a small portion of Scripture, which many have taught on before. So there's not going to be anything really new. Right.
But am I really exalting the Lord in this? And do other people pick up on that? And that's sometimes something I don't really know until people may mention it, or if I felt that coming out of this was something that hopefully the Lord was pleased and that He was glorified, not anyone or anything else.
There's a little distinction, I think, that comes into like the idea, was it a good sermon? Was the Lord glorified in what took place today? Like, I think that we can think of that in terms of what was the effect in the church, in the community, in the congregation of this sermon? So in other words, did it have impact? Did anyone's lives change? Did someone learn something new? That's sort of the impact side of it. And I think that in focusing on that side, we can lose another side of whether or not something was good. Was it good right then? Were you worshiping the Lord? Not worshiping the Lord by doing something and getting something done, as if we can change anybody's hearts, minds anyway. But were you worshiping the Lord because, like, you were saying things that were true? Like, God, you gave us good things, and we ruin them, and that's true, God. and so it's like God is the audience, and that I think that it's almost like if we could allow that to be the greater focus of our preaching, the exalting, the exalting, the worshiping of the Lord in preaching, not in the results of preaching, but in preaching itself,
in the exposition. As you said, that the actual act of speaking these words that the Lord's given us and then the insights that His Spirit has given us to share those out loud.
Yeah. I mean, and at a core of your message is God is actually trustworthy.
Yes.
Our hearts aren't, which is the problem, right? At the end of the Jeremiah 17, the section in Jeremiah 17, our hearts are deceitful. And so, but the Lord is not. He is sure. He sees our hearts, and yet He's Redeemer. You took us to Jeremiah 31, and to Christ's fulfillment of this granting of a new heart.
Yes.
And so at the essence of the message, the point of the message isn't you need to change your life in some fashion. The point of the message is God is trustworthy and He's gracious. And when we say those words, we're not just trying to bring about a change in a person's life and heart. We're saying that about God.
Yes.
Right? I'm saying that too in the very presence of God and this congregation. God, you're trustworthy. You're good. Yeah. So what part of preaching, whether it be the preparation, the delivery, the going home, and you didn't take a nap?
I did not take a nap after.
Yeah, I'm not sure that Tony has actually preached. Many of you might agree. If you haven't taken a nap on a Sunday afternoon, you haven't gone through the full preaching process, Tony. I thought I put that as the last step, but maybe next time. But what did you enjoy about the process of preparation and preaching? What are a couple things that struck you as enjoyable?
I think as you mentioned, I enjoy the history and the context. So that the early part, even going back into the first chapter of Jeremiah, and then especially dealing with the 16th chapter right before this, which laid out some of the groundwork, and just seeing some of those connections about why God was giving this message to Jeremiah and why He would even use that example of the shrub and the tree in talking to Jeremiah himself.
Yes.
Because He's teaching Jeremiah things.
Yeah.
That wasn't something He necessarily said, tell my people this. It's just, I want you to know this.
I just have the image in my mind that God isn't just teaching someone is not just making a proclaimer to bring about a result in a people, because one of the points is didn't work.
Yeah.
What Jeremiah prophesied, the people did not repent. Their hearts did not change. Right. And his congregation all ran off, right? Just like Jesus's congregation runs off, right? But what much of the book of Jeremiah is God investing in His preacher.
Yes, which I found very interesting. I don't know if I would have gained as much insight on that without going through this process. I think it's always hard to start writing, and I appreciated the time that you took with me to kind of explain the process of this, because I'd never done this before.
Yeah.
I've given quite a few presentations in my work environment over the years.
You are Chief People Officer.
I
probably spend some time with them.
I do.
Yeah,
spend
right.
some time with people and have to give talks to varying sizes of audiences and other presentations at conferences and things. So it wasn't the public speaking aspect that was concerned to me. It was really just, do I have something important and honoring to God to say? So then as I started to write the outline, that was helpful to at least get some of the basic thoughts down. I think for me, writing the next stage, that manuscript, which it's like writing a script of this is everything I want to say, maybe not said quite the way I would say it in person, but the way I would write it if I was writing a narrative.
Right.
And so that took a fair amount of time. So I reworked that some, and some places I thought, I spent too much time in certain areas, and some places I didn't say this quite right. I think that was the part of the process I spent the most time on. And then the third stage of honing that back into an outline that's not quite as Spartan as my first outline, but something I could speak from. That process, I thought, went maybe a little easier than I thought, because you had given me that flexibility of, okay, it doesn't have to be just one index card and that's got to have your whole sermon on it. Because I did not have the whole thing memorized. I knew the flow of it, but that wasn't all memorized. And so that came fairly easy, and then it came time to actually practice it. And so I practiced in my office at home and went through it for time and did that and realized I'd get distracted or I'd miss things and I have to go over it again. So I went over that I'd say probably about 4 or 5 times on my own.
Yeah, makes sense.
And so I felt pretty comfortable with that. And then my lovely wife, Dawn, said, I think it was maybe Saturday morning when I was working through some of the practice. She goes, will I get to hear this? Or do I have to wait till everybody else hears it Sunday?
Yes.
And I said, well, do you want to hear it? And she said, yes. She goes, I've read your notes. I would share some of the notes with her and what I was writing. But she goes, I would like to hear it.
That's great.
So we don't really have a...
get the Dawn Webster seal of approval before it goes to publishing.
I thought that was a good idea. Because she has good ideas. And she's kind, but she has things that can make it better. Yes. And so we set it. I set it up on the kitchen counter. We have kind of a higher bar area that's about the height of a podium, so I could put my Bible and the notes there, and I could practice pages. I'm not an iPad guy, so I practice with pages. All right. And so then I said, well, where do you want to sit? And our family room is where all the comfortable chairs are, is quite a ways away. She goes, well, I'll sit here in the kitchen. Yeah. And so I said, okay. So I got a dining room chair, and she had her Bible, and she said, could I have a blanket? And I said, okay. So she had that, and so then it was just, okay.
Now, does Dawn bring a blanket to church?
No, she does not.
All right. Well, now I know she'd be more comfortable. Maybe I'll bring one for this Sunday.
With this Florida air conditioning, she has them around the house.
Okay.
But that really helped. Yeah. It was just an audience of one. Yeah. But she paid attention, so I had somebody to make eye contact with, and went through it. And I didn't have any major gaffes, and she had a couple of suggestions, but she said, I really appreciate you doing that. Yeah. And so it was encouraging. Yeah. But there were 4 or 5 run-throughs that I had to get there. It wasn't like you just pop it out and figure, okay, I've said it to myself a couple times and I'm going to preach it. I needed to verbalize it repeatedly. Yeah.
That's great. I know maybe just real quick, the process that I've walked, I don't know how many elder candidates as well as just people that I've known along the way through elders in churches, through having really never preached a sermon, through preaching even semi-regularly. And I think that everyone that I've walked through this process is still preaching to this day in one capacity or another, which is really exciting. But they're all preaching using lots of different processes now. But the process that I've walked people from sort of the get-go through is to do your study, wind up taking those notes and turning them into, like you said, just a very basic outline, sort of your main idea, and then an introduction, a few points, and a conclusion. And then taking that outline and turning it into a manuscript. I don't manuscript. I've only manuscripted maybe 3 or 4 sermons in my life, but those were when I was learning how to write a sermon. And so we move that into a manuscript. And like you said, a manuscript isn't a sermon. It's a book. It's a short book. Yes. It's a chapter in a book. But then taking that manuscript and saying, okay, what is it that I'm going to actually share with a church on a Sunday morning that's in me? I don't need to write that down because it should come out of me. It shouldn't come out of a page that's being read. But what do I need as prompts to remind me what's in me so that then I can start preaching? And that's a much longer outline, 2-3 pages worth of an outline that you wind up with. And then, like you said, you run that a bunch of times. I cannot tell you how many times Sandy had to hear my first run of a sermon in those first years. And then after that, then, I've done all kinds of processes, but that basic idea is sort of still there and still tutors me to this day. So I hope you enjoyed the process. I'm thankful you worshiped the Lord, and it was good to see you worshiping the Lord. It was good to worship with you. And I know that's there's been impact in my own life from this passage, Tony. So thank you.
Right. Well, thank you.
Thanks for bearing with my coaching. I hope it's been profitable.
Well, I think that's just one of the things that I would mention. And I told Dawn this too, because she would ask me how it was going, and I said one of the things I really appreciated about the tutorials and just the conversations we had at various intervals.
Yeah.
They were not heavy-handed. They weren't micromanaging.
Yeah.
There were good points and tips and things that were helpful, but I had the overall goal at each stage. And then you're very encouraging, which is really helpful because that was important for me to stay motivated. Like, oh, this really isn't very good, and Jeremiah knows it, and maybe I know. There wasn't that. He said, well, here are the things that would make it even better, but the coaching aspect of it, which we're talking about here. But I think the encouragement was just a key factor for me continuing to have joy in it and trying to polish it.
Yeah, I think it's worth saying that while this was Tony's first time preaching, it's not his first time teaching in any capacity at CrossPointe Coast, particularly in that community group environment, or else he wouldn't be an elder candidate. Really, an elder candidate is someone who is already walking in so many of the much of the life of one who is shepherding others already, as we do in the church. And so it was it was not unexpected that you were able to teach because you've taught, because you've led us well over these years. So thank you very much, Tony. I think that it would be worth just mentioning to the Crafted Calling community that while those who are being coached at Crafted Calling can be people who are brand new to ministry, perhaps even exploring ministry, people who are maybe just out of seminary, wonderful time to step into particularly preaching coaching. It can also be people who are very experienced in ministry. I had my first coaching experience as one who was being coached after being in ministry for about 22 years, and learned so much, particularly in the area of leadership. And the whole idea is to, as a coach, is to be a whetstone for the person that you're coaching to hone their craft. It's not my craft to teach to you. It's a craft that's from the Lord. It's His word. It's His truth. It's your person that is speaking it, and to simply be a whetstone to help you hone it. It's why it was easy to be encouraging, Tony, is because I can encourage what God has already strengthened you in, and then serve as a whetstone to help to sharpen the things that need to be sharpened in your ministry.
Yeah.
So I would encourage you to, no matter where you are on the path, to consider coaching, whether it be Crafted Calling or elsewhere. And some of the tools that I've shared with Tony will be on our Slack channel for our community members, and I'll make those available to you, especially whether you would need to make use of them, or perhaps that you would invest in raising up elders in your own church as preachers there as well. So any final words for us, Tony, before we close?
No, it's been an enjoyable experience. Thank you.
Good.
Thank you for your help.
Hopefully the first of many, and I look forward to walking with you along the way in it.
Great.
So thank you, Crafted Calling. It's been good to spend this time with you, and feel free to reach out and share some of your thoughts out of this time as well.